amongst other things. Fabulous. So thanks everyone for joining us. I was just going to do a very brief introduction. I promise you that the next 30 minutes is going to be more interesting than a slide entitled Telephony Procurement Strategy might suggest. But there are, so just a bit of three bits of context. So the first is one of our missions is to have simple, secure, reusable technology. And telephony is a core part of that. The current arrangements that we have contracted, part of them expire mid next year. So the second piece of context, therefore, is that one of our governance principles is about how decisions that affect us all should be coordinated across the whole team. Now, if we're honest about where we are with telephony, actually, telephony at the moment is mostly a decision that affects Anwar. So one of the things we'd very much like to achieve in the future is that the entire telephony infrastructure of the whole organisation and our 280,000 residents aren't entirely dependent on Anwar, as good as he is at these sorts of things. And so then the final piece of context before I hand over to our friends is to welcome and introduce you to a company called Stance Global, who have been our partners on the discovery phase. There were a couple of things that really attracted us to Stance Global, the biggest of which was that they pitched with a Miro board, which shows incredible levels of confidence and bravery, which of course we were keen to reward. But the other thing is that they have a particular understanding of the technology code of practice, which we use to assess what we buy and how we buy things. And the most interesting thing about the piece of work that they've done with us is to give us an answer that was different from the one that we were expecting to receive. So with that, to introduce you to Sarah and James, I think, who are joining us to present the work that they've done and how they've done it and what that means for where we're going next.
Thank you, Matthew. That's a bit of a welcome there. So really appreciate that. Thanks very much, and it's great to be on with so many people today. Absolutely, as Matthew said, what we aim in this next 30 minutes between James and I is obviously to talk about the telephony procurement itself. And why we've come up with that particular different answer, what we've done. But I think we're hopefully aiming to give a bit of an overview in terms of some of the tools and techniques we've used as well. So we've already touched on Miro, but spending a bit of time on Google Venture Design Sprint, which was an approach that we'd taken, albeit a slightly COVID-friendly version, should we say, remote working friendly version. But I'll talk a little bit through that, and then James. We'll spend a bit of time talking through Wardley mapping and how we've used that as well, because we understand that they are tools that people within the team are quite keen to learn about and look on. Equally conscious that we could probably spend 30 minutes talking about all of those three individually. So we've gone a little bit crazy with the appendices in this particular presentation, which we can share, so people can have a look at a later date as well. So I'm Sarah Taylor. I've been the delivery manager on this particular piece of work. Far too many years experience across government in sort of delivery project program management, some large scale sort of transformation programs, delivery directorships. But I think JF, I think most of your introductions was about me telling you what to do. Which isn't strictly true, but hopefully will be a good double act on this. So Jeff, if you want to give a quick intro to yourself, that would be amazing.
Yeah, so my name is James Findlay. I'm one of the principals at Stance, but previously I was Group CTO at Department for Transport and CIO at HS2, amongst many other things. My sins are large, I have to say. But I just thought I'd start by saying a massive thank you, really, for the openness from everyone that we've spoken to. Has been astonishing, actually. And the 7-week discovery for telephony has actually benefited from that openness. So it's just a huge thank you to everyone for that. And I think one of the things that came out very, very strongly was that if we go to the next slide, the current telephony is struggling. I think I'm probably being a bit kind, but it's struggling in the current climate. And what came out in all of the conversations across Hackney is that this is more about just phones and calling people. It's more about how you collaborate with colleagues and have the dialogue with the residents in Hackney. That came out extremely strongly, and I think as a result, it took a slightly different turn than we were expecting. We're used to doing quite traditional telephony type procurements. We did one earlier this year. This was different, genuinely different, and I think as a result, it's actually been quite a really exciting experience for us. If we go to the next one. There were three sort of threads to this. Basically, the sort of strategy, how are you going to actually get to market and procure something that's going to be useful for you. Cost was a key factor as well. This is public money. We should be careful about it. And one of the other things was about the capability, particularly around some of your, principles around trying to ensure that you can have in-house capability used, as well as sort of using local skills that are available amongst the Hackney and sort of London community. So those are very much at the forefront of our thinking. And the next one. So the other thing which is really important is, and that's we'll actually do some of the emphasis of that later, is actually create some templates and things so you don't have to call people like us in. You can actually take these things forwards. That's really important because you should always be left with some level of knowledge transfer, and you should be sort of more informed, hopefully, with all of these sorts of engagements. Sarah?
Yes, just a couple of examples here, and there's quite a lot further down that we can leave with you, and all of these documents and the Miro board are available. As I say, as Matthew pointed out, we've used Miro, which is a very easy way of collaborating across the team. What it also does is provide an awful lot of templates, so you don't actually have to make stuff up yourself, which is, from a delivery manager perspective, that's absolutely fantastic. So what we've got top left there that everybody can see is just a very quick clip of our design sprint board. It's a template in Miro. It's very much based on the Google Venture design sprint approach. So I'll spend a few minutes talking around that to give a quick overview in terms of what that looks like, what some of the benefits are to that. And then, as I say, there's a bit more sort of reading to do yourself a little bit further down, with an awful lot of links if everybody wants to have a look at that. So the main premise around the Google Venture Design Sprint is you basically fit your design phase into one intensive week. We've been involved in a number of those before. We've run them with a number of other clients as well. But I think the one thing that has been very different for us at the moment is having to work remotely. We very much had to adapt the way that we applied the principles from the Google Venture Design Sprint across the work that we did. So whereas in previous cases we would have done all of the work in a week, we've actually phased the activity across the sprints that we did, and those that we have actually been involved in this piece of work would have recognized some of that through prioritization of what we call how might we's, which are an interpretation of the needs, which then help drive requirements. So as I say, a design sprint runs Monday to Friday. As I've already said, it's very defined in terms of its activities. It sets out what you do on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Your team is dedicated to the sprint for that week, so it's very resource intensive, but it's very productive, it's very effective, and Google will very much sit there and sell this as you negate the need for months of backwards and forwards debate and discussion around ideas and what to prototype. The aim very much being by the end of that first week that you will have a working prototype that you have tested with a number of your customers, and you will know where you're going forward. So some of the key activities for it, if I just touch briefly on what a week looks like. As I say, this is all further down in the pack, but a Monday is around setting the stage, mapping out the challenge, what the problem is that you're trying to solve, and then carrying out your research by asking your experts. So what is the problem? What is it we're looking at? And then hopefully by the end of that day, the aim very much will be, this is the focus for the rest of the week. What can we actually get done this week? What can we get to a working prototype? And does that give us the biggest benefit that we're looking at and the most sustainable change? Tuesday sees you moving towards potential solutions. Again, group activity. We know the challenge from a Monday. How do we think that's going to work in future? What works for Hackney? What aligns to our ways of working? And how do we look at current and new ideas that we've got in play already that can help drive that and very much test with those customers towards the end of the week. Wednesday is about coming up with that plan. It's also thinking ahead in terms of what Friday looks like. What are those theories and hypotheses that you want to be testing? Put my teeth back in. And really making sure that those potential solutions that you talked through on Tuesday are thought through in more detail. Thursday, in short, is around storyboarding that prototype and getting ready for the testing on the Friday. And then obviously Friday is very much around getting user feedback from those sessions, getting a more detailed understanding of your next phase, and really taking on that feedback and making sure that actually what you've prototyped really does meet the needs. And if so, what next? Equally, if not, that prototype doesn't work, then pick number 2 on your list and work through that one. So that's, as you can appreciate, it's very intensive. It's very much dependent on preparation in advance to make sure that you've got the teams involved. It's very collegiate session. You've got everybody in the room, and very much, you are sitting there making those decisions collectively together. And it's very much about participating and dedicating your time to that. So, as I say, it is. I've laboured the point a little bit, but it is quite intense, but it's very productive, and you do very quickly get to what your solution needs to be, what your prototype needs to be. What we did through this piece of work was very much filter that across the 7 weeks that we were working. I've included the link to the Miro board in the PowerPoint a little bit later on, in the pack a bit later on. So please do feel free to go in and have a look at what we've done, and what you'll actually start to see is some of the user needs that have come out, how they've been prioritised. And you'll also start to see how we've looked at sketching what those prototypes and those storyboards could be, and very much done in combination with the team. So it's been a great application of it in a slightly different format than we would expect. But I'm a big fan of venture design sprints. So I'll stop talking there and let James talk about Wardley for a bit, and then we'll actually just talk a little bit about in terms of the recommendations around the procurement strategy and some of the next steps.
So what I'll do is I'll just sort of give you a very high level sort of view. So really, it's strategic value chain mapping, and you try to understand the why you're doing something rather than something else. That's essentially what it is, and then you try and look at the maturity of it. But I'll cover it very quickly at the end. But we did do that during this, and what was really interesting is that helped us move to a place where we were really not going to be going for a like for like. I know that wasn't the desire, but we were going to go for something that was probably a little bit more of benefit for the internet area, but also tied in very strongly with some of the other initiatives, which I'll mention that you've got running, which I'll mention in a moment.
Are you okay for me to move on, James?
Yeah.
Okay, I have troubles with internet today, but who isn't? So a little bit really around some of the research that we've carried out on the telephony service itself, and there are things on here that you'll absolutely recognise as a team. Not only is this about better quality calls, as we talked around earlier, but very much around the integrated communications channels. You can read through those, but we were very much aware as well, certainly through some of the conversations and discussions that we had, that this was also around ways of working, and it was making sure that any solution that we put in place, and James will talk about this in a bit more detail in a minute, that we aligned to your ways of working, your technical principles, and certainly sustainability was part of that as well. So just some highlights there in terms of the research that we carried out and that we found, and a very big part of that, as nobody will be surprised, not just around data, but obviously around reporting capabilities as well. The service that's in play at the moment, it's done its job. and that there are needs clearly going forward for something that's a little less hydraulic, I guess, in terms of number crunching. Something's a little bit more timely in terms of provision of real-time data, but equally getting richer data sets that are made available to be able to drive the business forward as well, and certainly drive change activity needed internally and also for residents. So a little bit of overview there in terms of what some of the how might we's were around the use of data, some of the analytics piece, but equally, looking at the cost data as well there, which has very much helped James drive his activity around understanding costs, but also looking at what's needed from the market as well. Is there anything that you want to add around the market analysis that you did, James?
No, I'll go into that on the next slide.
Cool.
So out of that user research, this is sort of quite a high level sort of picture, but what the user needs drove us towards is try and look at things. There was core services that people absolutely needed, particularly where now we're going to go into another 6 months of excitement, that there were core things that you needed to have to still operate. So we've grouped these. It might not be 100% right, but this was the sense coming out the user needs against what was available in the market. And then there's these other services which I've called optional services. They might not be, but there were choices that you could make about some kind of automation as well. And what's really important here is when we were assessing the market against, if we go to the next slide, against the tech code of practice, and then into, if you go to slide 10 as well, into the sort of cultures that different organizations had, it was very clear that there were some who were quite open in the way that they worked. So whilst their technology was sort of up there, when you looked at the market, there were sort of 4 or 5 top players. There are only 2 or 3 who actually had what I would call an alignment with your principles, and primarily that was around their philosophy around openness, with open data, the open APIs. And I have to say, a lot of this was driven out of the conversations that we had with Rashmi, Darren and Yvonne around some of the new and emerging sort of things that happened, but also about the single view and the API platform. That really helped crystallize some of our, our view of the market around some of the technology choices that you could make. Because I think, the work that you are doing, I think I described it to Matthew and Rob as sort of God's work. But the API platform and the single view is just absolutely the way to go. And as a result, we were then looking at the market to ensure that whatever was provided would tie in with that sort of thinking. So that led on to sort of the recommendations, and we really sort of understood that we're talking about voice services and the contact center stuff. They're quite distinct things. The current solution, you've got it all wrapped up into a single thing, and then and just sort of various options. I'm not going to go through all of those, but one of the things that's really that telephony had to integrate into your API platform. So sorry about that, Rashmi. That's another thing that's going to be coming down, Tara, that's going to be coming down the road. But it was very important that there was this roadmap, and you could then sort of tie in this core platform into that sort of work. And that single view potentially could then help you have that customer insight when they're making the call. You got a little bit more information about the fact that they might have called about a noisy neighbor perhaps, but they're actually calling to pay their sort of council tax or whatever. So that was a really important thing from when we were making our recommendations. And then the other thing is about disaggregation. So I won't go into the detail of it, but you can actually disaggregate quite a lot. You've already taken your mobile stuff out, which is, I think, is the right decision. But also you could, if you want to, you could bring it down to bring your own carrier, whereby you can get your own telecommunications provision as opposed to something that's provided by the main comms platform provider. And the other thing was we personally feel that the actual Social Value Act is quite a good thing. There's been brilliant things that have been done in local government. Actually, predominantly central government have completely missed this trick, but local government done an awful lot. There were some things that you could potentially consider. Next steps. I'm not going to go through all of those things because I think there's some value sort of getting some questions, but I was hoping to so there's quite a mechanistic sort of next steps, but I was hoping to do a very quick gallop through. I don't know if Sarah, you wanted to do the Google Ventures. I think you've covered most of that, but I was going to do a very quick Wardley thing and then open it up really for any questions. I don't know how many people are familiar with this, but this is a really quick thing. If you want to do more, if you go on to Simon Wardley's blog, it's actually really helpful. But the greatest thing I like about Simon, he's a bit bonkers, and he describes himself as a destroyer of undeserved value, which I think is really important. And one of the things he says, we go on to the next slide, Sarah, next one. Strategy is fundamentally about answering the question of why, and that you actually need to have some sense of situational awareness. And the following slides are Simon's, and you've got to ask yourself, why are you doing something? You know, why does a general bombard a hill? Is it because 67% of successful general bombard hills? Or is it more about sort of, they're trying to understand, how to attack, what, when, why, and where. And then, that is quite a militaristic side of thing, but actually, it's based around, in technology terms, around user needs, what the actual value chain is, what the context is, how we understand how those different components of our technical architecture and the user needs change over time. But there's another thing as well, which doesn't get talked about, which is more about Wardley doctrine as well, but I'll cover that very quickly at the end. On the next one, you'll recognize this, a GDS sort of picture, but you need to understand what your users actually need. That's part of the exercise. You then need to understand what all the things that are usually hidden to the users that actually form that. This is from I think it's actually from Channel 4. I'm not sure if I was supposed to say that, but this is how they sort of understood how all the different components of the whole system served up, what they needed for their customers. And then on the next slide, and also recognize that things evolve over time. So you have novel and new stuff that then goes to, product rental type things. And then ultimately it's a commodity like electricity or the internet, which is a human right. This is an example of something I did quite a while ago now. God, I'm getting older. But you can turn sort of quite traditional box and wire diagrams into something where you can actually say, oh, actually, this is why I'm hemorrhaging costs here as opposed to over there, because actually it's unique and novel. And the contract that I've got with Fujitsu in this case is not geared up for rapid change. So you look at the things that are really important to you. You try to understand what's different about the services you provide and what the user need is, and then you start working through and saying, okay, well, we can start making sort of efficiencies. Some of this is hidden from users, so they won't really care about the plumbing necessarily, but actually it's quite important to understand the relationship between all of those. The other thing is, don't treat it as a single system. Everything has a sort of is discrete and has its own sort of properties. So you try to treat those as units. And the other thing is apply the right delivery method. So Agile works really well when it's sort of more on the Genesis end of the spectrum. Not so good if it's sort of like, the tried and tested and you're trying to do something on sort of a commodities type service. Agile, you tend to try and do that in-house, whereas other things might be more utility that's worth outsourcing. But it's when you map all of that, where you want to play is also a key point, because usually there's a finite amount of money that you have or time, and you might want to handle each of those things in a slightly different way. And these are actual things that we did do. So there was one supplier who was particularly tricky, quite closed, but we forced them to open up their API, and then we decided sort of the priority order of those things from a business perspective. And then finally is just to mention the Wardley doctrine, which is the last slide. That often missed, so people focus very much on the mapping, but this is more about the way your organization is from a sort of digital maturity perspective. It's not that popular, but I have to tell you that we've used it with a number of clients. More recently with the Royal Navy. I don't think I'll get into trouble for that. The new Navy Digital Service, but it really highlights not just the digital teams, but the wider organisations understanding how they operate, and it can be quite a useful tool. So I do recommend having a look at that. It can be quite a useful tool for improving the way you operate as well. Anyway, that's it. I'll pause there and
take a breath.
Question. Sorry.
No, I think as everyone can see, there's quite a lot of detail in here, so we will make these available, so you can take a read through and look at some of the other signposts in there. But I'm again conscious of time. But if there are any questions, I think it would be great to take some.
Okay, I have a question. Obviously, telephony service is going to be storing personal information. So if you're looking at cloud-based solutions, have you considered the possible impact of not getting a GDPR equivalent ruling?
So when we did look at GDPR, but we also looked at PCI DSS compliance, because obviously you're going to be taking sort of calls which are taking on sort of financial transactions as well. So we did cover all of that, and that's within the requirement stuff. So there is a conversation I'll hopefully have with Steve Addison later, just to sort of clarify some of the things that we need to do as part of the pre-market engagement. But security and privacy were definitely one of the considerations against all of the market, and will be part of that procurement exercise.
Yeah, I'm just considering the fact that we may come January, we may well find that you can't use a cloud-based solution unless the servers are actually based in the UK.
But yes, so that could be a consideration. So it could be that limits you to sort of certain data center regions. You're right.
Okay.
Okay. I've noticed that there are a number of comments in the chat, and it's great to see that some people are already doing Wardley mapping training and using design sprints. So it's good to see that they're being used in anger, which is great. I think, James, we're both on Slack for the moment. I think we are coming to sort of the end of this piece of work, but we're around on Slack, I guess, to take any questions that you've got out on the back of this. I will post the presentation on there as well, if that's appropriate, so everybody's got access to it. But I think, just echoing what James said earlier, really, everybody was so open and honest, and it was a great. I think we've all thoroughly enjoyed the piece of work, and hopefully, Matthew, it's given you what you need to move forward on.
It absolutely has. Sorry, I was just in the process of taking the mick out of Simon Wardley on the chat. I didn't get around to it. He's a wonderful man, but he talks on Twitter through the medium of conversations with other people who pose an extraordinary range of questions. For those of you interested today in the conversations he's been having about Tesla batteries with himself, nevertheless, it's an incredibly useful tool. Thank you to Stance. It's been a really interesting piece of work. I think it's left us really well placed for what comes next. So in particular, Steve and I will be working with colleagues in procurement on the next phase. This is a sufficiently high profile and sufficiently high value that will be going to our Cabinet Procurement Committee in November to seek permission to go through the digital marketplace process. So that there'll be more news on this over the coming months and adapting to change in processes and potentially laws, as Sean mentioned. And yeah, keep your eyes peeled. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Matthew.
Cool. Thank you.
Bye-bye,
Have a good day, everyone.